June 10th, 1991, Myers, California. An 11-year-old girl walks to her school bus stop. It is just a few dozen meters from her front door. Her stepfather watches from the yard. A gray sedan pulls up. A man gets out. And in the span of a few seconds, before her stepfather can fully understand what he is seeing, before he can drop his tools and run, she is gone. He jumps on his bike and chases after the car. He watches it disappear around a corner. He stands in the road staring at the empty space where his daughter just was. And then he runs inside to call 911. What follows is one of the most important, most disturbing, and ultimately most remarkable stories in the history of missing persons cases in America. Not just because of the crime, because of everything that happened and failed to happen in the 18 years that followed. Before we go into this case, I need to take a moment, because this is one of those episodes that I carry differently than others, and I want to be honest with you about why. This channel was built on the specific personal experience of loss, of watching a case involving people I loved go cold, of feeling the weight of a system that moves on before justice arrives. Every case I cover, I bring that with me. The Jaycee Dugard case touches something in that wound in a particular way, not just because of what was done to her, though that alone would be enough, but because of how many times the system looked directly at the situation and looked away. This is a case about a survivor, about extraordinary resilience, about a mother who never stopped believing, and about the two campus officers who, with nothing but human intuition and the willingness to act on it, did what 60 official checks had failed to do in 18 years. If this community means something to you, if you believe that victims deserve someone who will stay in the room with their stories, hit that like button now. Subscribe if you haven't, and let's give this case the attention it has always deserved. The summer of 1991 carried a particular feeling of safety across America. The Gulf War had ended. Troops were coming home. The Cold War was officially over. In Myers, California, a small community of roughly 5,000 people tucked into the Sierra Nevada mountains, 5 miles southwest of South Lake Tahoe, children rode bikes freely, and neighbors knew each other by name. It was the kind of place where parents felt comfortable letting their kids walk to the school bus stop alone. The Probin family lived in that community. Terry Probin was Jaycee's mother. Carl Probin was her stepfather. Jaycee Lee Dugard was 11 years old, blonde hair, bright smile, remembered by everyone who knew her as a cheerful girl who loved to laugh. She was, by every account, exactly the kind of child that community was built to protect. On the morning of June 10th, 1991, Carl dropped Jaycee at the bus stop just meters from their front door. He returned to the yard to continue his morning routine. And then, within minutes, everything changed. A gray sedan, a man with a stun gun, a woman behind the wheel, and a child pushed into the back of a car before her stepfather had time to react. Carl chased that car on his bike until it vanished from sight. Then he stood in the road, and then he ran back to the house to make the call that would launch one of the largest searches in El Dorado County history. The investigation that followed was not small. Thousands of volunteers, search dogs, helicopters, the FBI's Sacramento field office, thousands of tips from across California and Nevada. Every one of them followed up. Carl had provided a description of the gray sedan and the man who had used the stun gun, but there was no license plate, no specific identifying detail that could narrow the field in a state with millions of gray cars. The search concentrated on the South Lake Tahoe area and neighboring Nevada. It never extended to the Bay Area. It never reached Contra Costa County. It never reached the city of Antioch, 190 miles west, where Phillip Garrido lived, and where Jaycee was being held. Garrido was 40 years old at the time of the abduction. He was a registered sex offender on federal parole for kidnapping and rape since 1976, when he had abducted a woman in Nevada, held her in a shed, and sexually assaulted her for hours before his arrest. He had been sentenced to 50 years in federal prison, plus a life sentence in state court. He served 11 years. He was released in 1988, just 3 years before he took Jaycee. During his parole period, his original victim had proactively contacted his parole agent to warn that Garrido was continuing dangerous behavior and needed closer supervision. The warning was noted in his file. The system did not act on it. 3 years later, an 11-year-old girl was taken from a school bus stop in the Sierra Nevada mountains and driven 190 miles to a backyard compound in Antioch. The property at 1554 Walnut Avenue in Antioch looked, from the front, like a house where a family lived. Neighbors had no particular reason to look further. But behind that house, hidden by dense trees, a high fence, and tarps positioned to block any view from outside, Garrido had constructed a compound of tents and sheds covering roughly 900 square feet. This is where Jaycee was taken. In the early years of her captivity, she lived in near total isolation. No leaving the compound, no contact with anyone outside except her captors, no electricity or running water, no school, no medical care. She was 11 years old. Jaycee was repeatedly assaulted by Garrido throughout her captivity. In 1994, when she was 14 years old, she gave birth to her first daughter, inside the backyard compound, with no medical support. In 1997, at 17, she gave birth to a second daughter under similar conditions. Both girls grew up in the compound. No school, no birth records, no legal documentation of their existence. Garrido told anyone who asked that they were his granddaughters. The birth of her first child transformed Jaycee's experience of captivity in a way that she would later describe in her own words. She was no longer only thinking about her own survival. She was thinking about a child who needed her. That child became her reason to keep going, and also her reason not to take actions that might have endangered the baby. Garrido maintained control not through physical force alone. He built a comprehensive system of psychological manipulation over 18 years, combining total isolation, complete economic dependence, and an intense religious worldview in which he positioned himself as a prophet with a special mission. Jaycee and her daughters lived inside a constructed reality in which the compound was the only world they knew. While Jaycee and her daughters lived in that backyard compound, the federal parole system was conducting standard supervision procedures. They came to the house. They knocked on the door. They spoke with Garrido at the front of the property. They noted in their files that the conditions of parole were being met. And in 60 visits across 10 years, not one of them went into the backyard. Full property inspections are a basic requirement when supervising a sex offender on parole, particularly one with a documented history of kidnapping and holding victims on his own property. The requirement was clear. The history was documented. And 60 times, investigators stopped at the front door. Jaycee and her daughters were meters away on the other side of a fence. In 2006, a neighbor called Antioch police to report that people appeared to be living in tents in Garrido's backyard and that children's voices were coming from behind the covered area. Officers went to the address. They spoke with Garrido at the front of the house. They did not enter the backyard. They filed a report indicating no issues at the address. In 2008, the parole agency conducted an investigation into Garrido following reports of unusual behavior. Investigators came to the house. The compound was not checked. The report found nothing of concern. Jaycee had been held for 17 years at that point. I need to pause here, because what I have just described to you is not an outlier. It is not a single failure by a single person on a single bad day. It is a pattern, a documented, systematic pattern of a supervision structure that checked the front door 60 times and never once opened the gate to the backyard, where an abducted child was being held. And I think about that in the context of what this channel is for. We talk often about systemic failure, about cases that go cold because someone decided not to follow a thread, about victims who waited for a system that moved on. And Jaycee Dugard spent 18 years inside a failure that was documented, flagged, and ignored at multiple levels. And I want this community to hold that, not just as outrage at a specific case, but as a reminder of why stories like this need to be told in full, why the system's failures deserve to be named as clearly as the criminal's actions. Because understanding both is how things change. If you believe that, subscribe right now. Share this episode. This is the kind of case that deserves to be remembered precisely, not summarized. Now let's talk about the two people who finally ended this. On August 24, 2009, Phillip Garrido came to the UC Berkeley campus with two teenage girls, his biological daughters with Jaycee, to request permission to hold a religious event. Jaycee was not with them that day. She was still in Antioch. The first person to receive him was Lisa Campbell, a campus events manager. She did not have a warrant. She did not have Garrido's criminal history in front of her. She had a conversation with a man requesting an event permit, and she felt that something was wrong. Garrido's manner was erratic and intense. His language about his religious mission was unstable. The two girls with him appeared withdrawn and subdued in a way that Campbell could not fully articulate, but could not ignore. She scheduled a follow-up meeting for the following afternoon and immediately reported her concerns to Officer Allie Jacobs of the UC Berkeley Police Department. Jacobs ran a background check. Phillip Garrido was a registered sex offender on federal parole for kidnapping and rape. His file contained no record of having children. A sex offender with a kidnapping history was on a university campus with two girls he claimed were his daughters, and there was no documentation of those daughters existing anywhere in the official record. On August 25th, Campbell and Jacobs met with Garrido again, keeping the interaction routine, giving nothing away, ensuring he did not flee before parole could be alerted. After the meeting, Jacobs contacted Garrido's parole officer directly with everything she and Campbell had observed. The parole officer recognized immediately that this was new, serious information not reflected anywhere in Garrido's file. Garrido was summoned to the parole office in Concord and told to bring everyone with him. On August 26, 2009, Garrido arrived at the parole office with Nancy Garrido, the two teenage girls, and a young woman he introduced as his niece, calling her by the name she had used for 18 years inside the compound. Investigators separated each person for questioning. During the interrogation, Garrido confessed. He admitted to the 1991 abduction. The young woman sitting in that room confirmed her real identity to authorities. Jaycee Lee Dugard, 29 years old. The 11-year-old girl who had stood at the school bus stop in Myers, California on a June morning 18 years earlier, whose stepfather had chased after the car on his bicycle until it vanished, was alive. That same night, Jaycee and her two daughters were taken to a safe location. The FBI arranged a phone call between Jaycee and her mother Terry, who was in Southern California. The first time they had heard each other's voices in 18 years, 2 months, and 16 days. The following morning, Terry flew north. She reunited with her daughter. She met her grandchildren for the first time. Jaycee's aunt described the moment. The smile on my sister's face was as wide as the ocean. Phillip Garrido was charged with kidnapping, false imprisonment, multiple counts of rape, lewd acts with a minor, and numerous additional charges relating to 18 years of crimes. Nancy Garrido faced kidnapping and rape charges as well. Both initially pleaded not guilty. After nearly 2 years of proceedings, Phillip pleaded guilty to 1 count of kidnapping and 13 counts of sexual assault. Nancy pleaded guilty to kidnapping and rape. Both waived their right to appeal. The plea agreement was reached in part to spare Jaycee and her daughters from testifying in open court. At sentencing in June 2011, Jaycee did not attend the courtroom. She submitted a written statement. Her mother, Terry, read it aloud. I choose not to be here today because I refuse to waste 1 more second of my life in your presence. Everything you did to me was wrong. You stole my life and the life of my family. Judge Douglas Pfister called Phillip Garrido the textbook example of a dangerous sex offender and sentenced him to 431 years to life in prison. Nancy Garrido received 36 years to life, the maximum available under the laws in effect at the time of the crimes. JAYC subsequently sued the state of California over the systematic failures of the parole supervision that had allowed Garrido to hold her undetected for 18 years. California settled the lawsuit for $20 million, the largest settlement in state history for parole system failures. An official legal acknowledgement that what happened to Jaycee was not only the crime of the Garridos, it was also the failure of the system built to prevent exactly that. In 2011, Jaycee published her memoir, A Stolen Life. It became a bestseller, not because it dwelled in graphic detail, but because it told the psychological truth of what survival inside an unimaginable situation actually looks like, a truth that only someone who lived it could tell accurately. She also founded the JAYC Foundation, an organization supporting families affected by abduction, with a focus on recovery and reintegration. The specific, complicated, under-discussed work of rebuilding a life after captivity that ordinary medical and legal systems are not designed to address. Jaycee turned 18 stolen years into something that could help others. No one had the right to demand that of her. She chose it herself. This case leaves 3 things I want you to carry. The first is about who is believed. When Catherine Hall, Garrido's original victim, the woman he had kidnapped and assaulted in 1976, contacted his parole agent to warn that he was continuing dangerous behavior, the agent's documented response was to dismiss her warning as hysteria. 3 years later, he kidnapped Jaycee. Victims who warn about perpetrators must be listened to, not noted and filed, not dismissed, listened to. The cost of dismissing that warning was 18 years. The second is about what supervision actually means. 60 checks across 10 years at the address of a convicted sex offender with a documented history of kidnapping and holding victims. 60 checks in which not one investigator went into the backyard. A door check is not supervision. It is the appearance of supervision. And the gap between those two things is where Jaycee lived, invisible for nearly 2 decades. The third is about 2 people who trusted their instincts. Lisa Campbell and Allie Jacobs had no special warrant, no forensic advantage, no information that 60 previous checks had not also had access to. What they had was the willingness to act on the feeling that something was wrong, to take that feeling seriously, to follow it, and to alert the right people before the situation could be explained away. If something looks wrong, a child who seems afraid, an adult exerting excessive control over those around them, a situation that your gut says is not right, report it. You do not need to be certain. You need only to say something and let the appropriate people look further. That instinct, acted on, ended 18 years of captivity. Jaycee Dugard is not defined by what was done to her. She is defined by what she chose to build after it. The foundation, the memoir, the decision to speak when she did not have to speak, to help when she did not have to help, to turn the years that were taken from her into something that might protect someone else. That resilience is not something the justice system gave her. It is not something the settlement gave her. It is hers, entirely and completely hers.
And Terry Probin, the mother who refused for 18 years to accept that her daughter was gone, who prayed and searched and held on to the possibility that Jaycee was alive somewhere, deserves to have her name said in this story as clearly as any other. She was right. She waited 18 years to be right. And on August 27, 2009, she stood in a room with her daughter and the grandchildren she had never known existed, and the smile on her face was as wide as the ocean.
To this community, thank you for sitting with this one all the way to the end. Cases like Jaycee's are the reason this channel exists. The ones where the system failed. The ones where someone waited. The ones where justice eventually arrived but only after a cost that can never be fully accounted for. If this episode gave you something, please share it. Subscribe if you haven't, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. I will be reading every one. I love this community. God bless every one of you. I'll see you in the next one.